Christian University,
Right.
and we're right now in a class that's oh my goodness, what's it called? Instructional technology
and design,
something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And so one of our assignments was talk to someone who's actually in the business doing it. So we had to split off into groups and go find different people in places, and so. We're like, well, CATE's really close to the NCU, so let's find out what they do there and see if we can meet with someone. So.
All right, that makes sense. And what are you going to do with this interview? Does it get written up and turned in, or is it?
Yeah, we just kind of tell the class what we heard and.
Okay.
And we put
basically that's it. I mean, it's just for our personal.
All right.
Classes use of what's going on out there in the world. So.
Okay. Well, that's good then. So, what was your question for me?
Okay, so the first question is just kind of like your own background of like education and kind of how you got here. So.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Colorado and got a teaching certificate in 1974 from Colorado State University. Then I was a classroom teacher in Aurora Public Schools. Aurora is the eastern suburb of Denver, and you all are probably too young, but if you ever flew into the old Denver Stapleton Airport, you flew directly over our attendance zone.
Oh, that's cool.
So I taught there in a middle school for 7 years, and then I moved to another middle school that just got opened, and then I moved to a high school. So I was trained as a math teacher. That's what my certification was in, but I actually almost never taught math. I think twice in the 13 years that I had a math class, 3 times maybe. Because when I was in the middle schools, we had a team teaching scheme that was rather more elaborate than the one that they have in the local schools here, which typically is only an English and language arts teacher. So we would have a team of teachers that could have 2, 3, or 4 people on it, and then 30 times that students, and a 4-hour time block in the day, and then we had to deliver the 5 academic subjects. So I was quite often on a 2-person team, so you had to teach 3 different disciplines. And I was always teamed with somebody who could teach math, but nobody who could teach science. So I always ended up being a science teacher. But interestingly enough, we all taught reading. When they started this process, I taught 6th grade most of those years. They decided that they would teach reading as a co-equal subject with the other people, and of course no one has any reading credentials, no one has any reading certifications or anything. It's vastly illegal. But interestingly enough, nobody in all those years, as much griping as there was about having to do that, nobody ever filed a grievance, which they could win, hands down.
That's funny.
Much less a lawsuit, which they could also win, hands down. I mean, it was clearly inappropriate. They did have resource teachers to try to help you to teach reading. So, but I taught social studies a couple of times. I taught language arts a couple of times. I taught science and reading always. It changed from year to year. So I did that for 10 years in 2 different schools. And then I moved to a high school in 1985, when I taught computer science. The district had created a 1-semester graduation requirement that typically sophomores took a class. And there were several different choices. One of them was a programming class where they learned to program in BASIC. And then, this is on Apple IIe's, by the way. But the bulk of students took a class that we called computer literacy, which was a little bit of word processing, a little bit of what is a computer about, little spreadsheets, a little database, a little keyboarding, literacy stuff. And I did that for 3 years. And then I decided to pursue a PhD, and so I moved here and went through the PhD program and finished a degree in 91. And then 91 is the year that the Measure 5 property tax cuts were induced. The teacher ed program was canceled. My wife and I just decided to stay. My wife works for a textbook company. She does teacher training. You buy the books, she comes in and trains you. She was happy doing that, didn't want to move someplace. So I just stayed here and Lynn Anderson-Inman, who's the director of CATE. We started writing grants, and we didn't have control of CATE at the beginning. CATE as an organization was actually founded in the late 70s, and very little ever became of it. And at one point it was an unanswered telephone and a sign.
That's funny.
And then after the Measure 5 cuts, when the College of Education reorganized itself, CATE was sort of resuscitated, and Lynn became the director to house the research projects that we had already had going. And it's an organizational nightmare to try to keep track of which thing is where, but that's where we are. So we're a research and development group. We're entirely funded on external funding. We spend our lives getting the federal government to send us your tax dollars, which we use to give interviews, and so forth. So we do research. We cover a variety of different strands of research, some of which I'm involved in, some of which I don't know anything about. There are some sort of strands. The one that I'm most involved in is works with a construct that we call supported text, which is sort of the next step past digital books. If you're going to read a book from a computer screen, what would it be like, and why would you want to? It's sort of, we look at on the kinds of things that you can read on a Kindle as being little better than a PDF. So we try to make much more advanced kinds of things. And the latest project that we got funded is called METRIC, which stands for the Mathematics E-Text Research Center. And its job is to try to investigate how to make digital texts for mathematics classes, algebra classes in particular, and it focuses on students with learning disabilities and students with vision impairments. So if you're blind and the only way you can access your textual materials is through text-to-speech, a screen reader, and so forth. Up until quite recently, you had almost no access to mathematical notation. You either had to have a human read it to you, or you had to have it described.
Wow.
But there was no way to get it actually read. Now there's been new technology developed about that helps with that. But there's no research around as to whether you can actually learn mathematics by listening to it that way. So METRIC funds research projects around the country. We don't do it all here. We pass the money through. So we have a group at Purdue University that's looking at this very specific problem. We give somebody simple expressions, x plus 1 equals 0. Can they understand that? And if they can, then you go to x squared plus 1 equals 0. Can they understand that? And you get increasingly complicated things. And what we're trying to do is to find out if there's a ceiling, if there's some place where the complications of using the text-to-speech engine and the complications of the notation itself, and it just stalls out. You just can't cope with it anymore. You've got short-term memory issues here. Everybody's, the old 7 plus or minus 2 result. You can hold 7 items simultaneously in your short-term memory. Well, if you're doing text-to-speech, some of those items have to be about running the text-to-speech engine. And so the amount of your short-term memory that you can apply to the mathematics has now been reduced. Right. So it would be really nice if there is a ceiling, if all of Algebra 2 fell below that ceiling. If Algebra 2, if it falls above that, now of course it's different for every student and so forth. If you know Braille, then there's a code called the Nemeth code that will unambiguously translate notation into a form of Braille.
Oh, wow.
And you can also write Braille. The problem with text-to-speech is that there's not a speech-to-text. And so you're left able, perhaps you can hear it and understand it, but you have no way to produce it. And that's a much more difficult problem. So we got a project working there. There's another project that's doing similar work, except looking at tests. If you're taking a high-stakes test, your graduation test, your SAT test and so forth, those have to be rendered into a text-to-speech format by law. So how do you do it?
Yeah, wow.
What's the most effective way to do that? So we have another group is trying to convert all of the printed materials from a 7th grade math curriculum into electronic forms that can be read with a text-to-speech reader. And this is for what's called print-disabled students. And these are people who have difficulty coping with printed material for a variety of reasons. If you're dyslexic, severely dyslexic, then it's no better than if you were blind. You can't make sense out of things. Now there's varying degrees and so forth, but lots of students that are on a learning disabilities IEP can get, and there's a huge tussle between the special ed community that wants more and more access to these tools and the publishing community, which is required by law to provide electronic versions of their materials, but only for certain disability groups. And so there's this argument over trying to grow or shrink that group of people, that it would have access to those kinds of accommodations.
Wow.
The publishers quite naturally are concerned that they'll lose control over their materials if they start passing around files to too many people. So we have, that's sort of one strand. We have another project that's looking at very similar issues except for English language learners. If you're trying to learn in English, but English isn't your first language, then is there special assistance that can be built into the document that would help use that? That particular project is called Astraeus, and that stands for something I can never remember what it is. And we're working with 2 schools in Springfield on that. And there the issues are, and that was targeted specifically on Spanish-speaking students. And so if you want to get vocabulary assistance and you click on a word and something pops up, what should pop up? There's no research to you know, so, and should it be in English or should it be in Spanish? And should it be spoken aloud? It should be spoken aloud in English or in Spanish. And we're anticipating that different students will need different things. If you have a student who's been in school, who knows what metamorphosis is, he just doesn't know what the English word for metamorphosis is. If you can just tell them the Spanish word for metamorphosis, then they can instantly make the connection. But on the other hand, you've got students who haven't been in school, perhaps, and they have no idea what metamorphosis is, and telling them what the Spanish word for metamorphosis is doesn't help them a bit. Right? They need background information and so forth. And there are students who are sort of lingually ambiguous. English is their second language, but they speak English at school. They speak Spanish at home. They don't read and write Spanish very much because they don't have they do a lot of reading and writing at home. The reading and writing that they do is at school, and that's in English. And so their literacy skills in Spanish aren't that good. Right? So providing them a bunch of text in Spanish doesn't necessarily help them either. Right? That could be just as hard to read as the English. Now, those are just examples of things that could be. And so that whole project's trying to figure that out. We have another project that's trying to convert some project-based learning materials that have been developed in Mexico and translate those into English and use them in bilingual classrooms here, but where both the English and the Spanish of these units are available at the same time. And you can imagine starting with students that mostly use the Spanish materials, but over time shift over to mostly using the English materials and so forth, because they've got both of them there. They can provide that. That's called COPLS, which also stands for something I don't remember. It's funded by the Science Foundation, and it's targeted on science materials, middle school science materials. See, quite a bit of what you do, it depends on who your funds come from. So the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Ed is interested in students with vision impairments. They get money for that, so you write a grant that applies to that. And NSF is interested in science materials for Spanish speakers. And